Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the territory of Cinema Channel. If you enjoy what we do here, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Today we are going to be discussing the 1993 film Philadelphia. The narrative centers on a young ambitious lawyer, Andrew Beckett, whose ascent within a prestigious Philadelphia law firm is swift and promising. He possesses a sharp intellect, honed by his time at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and a drive to succeed in the cutthroat world of corporate litigation. Andrew meticulously crafts an image of professional perfection, recognizing that in that environment, any perceived weakness could be career-ending. Unbeknownst to his colleagues, Andrew is living with AIDS. This dual existence becomes increasingly difficult to sustain as the physical manifestations of the illness begin to interfere with his demanding work schedule. The film carefully traces the quiet erosion of his professional facade. It's clear that Andrew draws strength from his background, perhaps fueled by the desire to prove himself in a field that often rewards conformity. The inevitable occurs when a crucial presentation is hampered by Andrew's deteriorating condition, a fact noticed by the senior partners. Shortly thereafter, he is dismissed. The official reason given is a supposed lapse in professional judgment concerning a case file, but the underlying truth, a reality the firm desperately wishes to ignore, is his medical status. Devastated and facing a bleak future, Andrew seeks legal recourse. This decision leads him to seek counsel from Joseph Miller, a prominent, often bombastic personal injury lawyer known for his aggressive courtroom style and his somewhat hesitant, prejudiced initial reaction to Andrew's situation. Miller himself is portrayed as a man comfortable in his established world, one where confronting deep-seated social anxieties, like those surrounding AIDS, is avoided unless absolutely necessary for a fee. The process of building the case exposes both men to the raw prejudice rampant in the early 90s. Andrew, usually so reserved and controlled, is forced into the public spotlight, while Miller has to confront his own ingrained discomfort. We see flashbacks to Andrew's life, his artistic inclinations, perhaps suggesting a sensitivity at odds with his corporate persona, and his relationship with his partner, Miguel, who provides a necessary source of unconditional support. As the trial progresses, the opposing counsel employs tactics designed not to argue the law, but to smear Andrew's character, focusing relentlessly on his sexuality and his illness. This tactic highlights the societal fear that permeated discussions of HIV/AIDS at the time, turning a wrongful termination suit into a referendum on morality. Miller, initially perhaps motivated by the potential payout, begins to genuinely champion Andrew's cause, witnessing firsthand the cruelty inflicted upon his client. His transformation is gradual, evolving from reluctant advocate to fiercely protective defender. The film details the physical toll the disease takes on Andrew, showing his vulnerability juxtaposed against the relentless aggression of the defense. Through these trials, both inside and outside the courtroom, a profound, unexpected bond forms between the two lawyers, one built on mutual respect born from shared adversity. The climax isn't simply a legal victory, it's a moment where the abstract concept of discrimination is given a profoundly human face, forcing the audience and the characters to acknowledge the inherent dignity denied to Andrew simply because of who he loved and what afflicted him. Though the victory is hard-won and tragically timed, it serves as a powerful testament to the necessity of fighting for one's inherent rights, even when facing overwhelming societal hostility. Andrew Beckett carried the weight of his brilliance heavily, a young man whose trajectory within that imposing Philadelphia firm seemed almost predetermined for partnership. One could sense the intense focus he brought to every brief, the kind of obsessive preparation often found in those who feel they must overcompensate, perhaps driven by a deeply personal desire to excel far beyond what was expected of someone like him, someone perhaps already marginalized in some unseen way. His early victories were quiet triumphs, achieved through meticulous dissection of legal precedent. a stark contrast to the flamboyant, results-oriented style of the personal injury lawyers he would eventually encounter. Joseph Miller, on the other hand, was a force of nature in the courtroom, a man whose energy seemed to fill every space he occupied. He was the quintessential Philadelphia trial lawyer, smelling of cheap coffee and victory, comfortable wading into the messy, emotional terrain of accidents and injuries, areas where the lines of right and wrong were often starkly drawn. Yet when Andrew first walked into his office, the air crackled with an unfamiliar tension. Miller's initial discomfort regarding Andrew's diagnosis wasn't just professional. It betrayed a deep-seated societal awkwardness, the kind that freezes people when confronted by what they don't understand or fear. The flashbacks woven into the narrative, showing Andrew's life outside the office, perhaps lingering over a canvas or sharing an intimate moment with Miguel, offered glimpses of the authentic self that the corporate world demanded he suppress. Miguel, steadfast and unwavering, became the anchor, the living proof that a full, loving life existed beyond the confines of legal briefs and malpractice insurance. Seeing Andrew's physical decline during the discovery phase was agonizing. The sharp tailoring of his suits suddenly seemed too heavy for his increasingly frail frame. The disease was stripping away the artifice, revealing the vulnerability beneath the polished exterior. During the depositions, the defense lawyers were ruthless, transforming the legal argument into a moral inquisition. They weren't just questioning Andrew's competence, they were attacking the very fabric of his private life, trying to make his illness synonymous with unreliability. It was an ugly spectacle, showcasing how easy it is to dehumanize someone when you can reduce their existence to a diagnosis. Miller, witnessing this calculated cruelty, began his metamorphosis. Initially viewing the case as a high-stakes legal puzzle, he started absorbing Andrew's plight, his aggressive instincts turning outward against the predatory tactics of the opposing side. The courtroom ceased being merely a venue for financial gain. It became a stage for fundamental justice. Miller's transformation was palpable, his closing arguments shifting from calculated rhetoric to impassioned defense of human dignity, a testament to the corrosive power of prejudice when finally confronted head-on by committed advocacy. The shared journey forged a bond that transcended their vastly different professional origins, rooted in the shared necessity of fighting an unjust world. The emotional landscape of the trial was relentless, a constant battering ram against Andrew's fragile composure. We see him striving to maintain the rigorous standards of his former profession, even while enduring agonizing physical symptoms that no amount of legal preparation could mask. His mind, still razor-sharp, would sometimes betray him in small public ways. A slight hesitation in answering a question, a tremor in his hand while turning a page, and each instance was seized upon by the opposing counsel as definitive proof of his supposed instability. It was a performance of suffering, played out under the harsh, unforgiving lights of the courtroom. Joseph Miller, channeling his courtroom prowess, found an unexpected target for his formidable aggression. His initial skepticism melted away, replaced by a protective fury typically reserved for the most vulnerable of his personal injury clients. He began to study Andrew not just as a plaintiff, but as a brilliant mind deliberately crushed by fear-mongering. Miller started to internalize the injustice, perhaps recognizing a parallel between the powerful firms who discarded people based on their perceived weakness and the insurance companies he routinely battled. His characteristic courtroom swagger adopted a new, sharper edge, aimed squarely at dismantling the hypocrisy embedded in the defense's arguments. The contrast between Andrew's disciplined, highly ordered professional past and the chaotic, messy reality of his illness and the ensuing legal battle was heartbreakingly clear. Andrew's dedication to his career had been an almost ascetic pursuit, sacrificing personal life for professional elevation. Now, that very elevation had become the weapon used against him. The film beautifully illustrates how the things Andrew tried hardest to hide, his private life, his body's betrayal, were the very things that demanded to be seen for the case to succeed. The victory, when it finally arrived, was bittersweet, heavy with the knowledge of what had been lost in the struggle. It was less a celebration of legal victory and more a profound, weary acknowledgement that the system had been forced, grudgingly, to recognize the humanity of a man it had tried so hard to erase. For Miller, the win wasn't just a high-profile case closed. It marked a significant internal realignment, a professional turning point where the pursuit of justice momentarily eclipsed the pursuit of pure profit. For Andrew, the end of the legal ordeal coincided tragically with the final stages of his illness, leaving the audience with the lingering, poignant image of a battle won too late for the warrior himself, a testament etched in memory rather than etched on a partnership plaque. The final phase of the battle saw Andrew retreating further into the protective cocoon offered by his partner Miguel and the strained but growing support of Miller. The exhaustion etched onto Andrew's face was no longer just stress from litigation. It was the physical manifestation of a life lived under duress, hiding a truth in an environment utterly hostile to it. He was confronting not just a law firm, but an entire era's fear of the unknown, crystallized into legal maneuverings. One could observe in his demeanor the profound sadness of realizing that the meritocracy he believed in was utterly conditional on conformity, on invisibility regarding difference. Miller's advocacy reached its peak as he transformed his summation into a fierce moral appeal. He used his considerable skill at painting vivid pictures for the jury, not of legal precedents, but of the daily reality Andrew faced. The humiliation of being watched, the fear of being discovered, the simple, crushing weight of discrimination. Miller, the veteran of messy, tangible grievances, found himself arguing for the intangible right to exist without persecution. His voice, usually booming with self-assurance, took on a note of genuine moral indignation when describing how the firm had chosen expedience over ethics, sacrificing a brilliant employee to maintain a sanitized corporate image. The tension in the courtroom during these moments was almost unbearable, a tightrope walk between technical law and raw human empathy. Andrew's quiet dignity during these attacks, his refusal to be drawn into the mudslinging despite the temptation to lash out against the constant character assassination, was perhaps his greatest strength displayed. It underscored the core message. He was dismissed not for incompetence, but for being sick and gay, and no amount of legal obfuscation could truly cover that naked truth. When the verdict finally came, it was delivered into a silence thick with unresolved emotion. It was an affirmation, yes, but one shadowed by the knowledge that the fight had hastened the end for Andrew. The legal system, slow and clumsy, had finally bent toward justice, but the personal cost was absolute. The resolution wasn't triumphant in the conventional sense. It was somber, a necessary demarcation line drawn against bigotry, achieved at the highest possible price. The narrative concludes not with Andrew celebrating a settlement, but with a quiet acknowledgement of his legacy, a legacy forged not in the conference rooms he once aspired to dominate, but in the sheer, courageous act of demanding to be seen as fully human until the very end. The aftermath of the verdict settled over the city like a cold, damp fog, mirroring the lingering grief that clung to those left behind. Andrew's passing, which followed swiftly after the legal resolution, created a vacuum, leaving Joseph Miller to navigate the complex reality of the financial award and the symbolic victory. Miller, fundamentally changed by the intensity of the case, now carried a heavier sense of responsibility. The money, substantial as it was, felt almost irrelevant against the profound absence of his client. He saw the firm's grudging compliance not as surrender, but as a concession made under duress, a legal obligation rather than a genuine ethical awakening. Miguel, stripped bare by loss, found a tentative path forward, partly through the unexpected connections forged during the trial. He watched Miller, this hard-edged litigator who had ultimately become a fierce protector, and saw a reflection of the fight Andrew had waged, a fight for recognition. Miller, perhaps searching for a way to honor Andrew beyond the verdict, began to take on other cases involving discrimination, cases that smelled less of corporate maneuvering and more of fundamental unfairness. His trial style softened slightly, incorporating a newfound depth of empathy, a ghost of Andrew's quiet suffering informing his aggressive cross-examinations. The case of Andrew Beckett became an internalized touchstone for both men. For Miller, a painful reminder of the cost of prejudice and the necessity of true advocacy. For Miguel, the closure that allowed the memory of Andrew to transition from a source of constant pain to a source of quiet strength. The prestigious firm, having weathered the storm, quickly tried to bury the uncomfortable episode, attempting to return to its insulated world of high finance. But the cracks shown during the trial were visible to those who knew where to look. The film leaves us with the sense that while the systemic change is slow, the personal transformation witnessed in Miller and the enduring memory of Andrew's courage create a ripple effect, a quiet insistence that some battles, regardless of their personal outcome, must be fought simply because they are right. The legacy of that searing legal battle resonated most deeply within the confines of Miller's office, which now seemed slightly less ostentatious, perhaps purged of some of its former mercenary sheen. Joseph Miller, having tasted the acid of moral conviction, found himself increasingly drawn to the less lucrative, more emotionally taxing fights. He developed a reputation, subtly shifting from the lawyer who chased the biggest settlements to the one who stood firmest against institutional arrogance. His suits, though still sharp, often looked a bit rumpled by the end of the day, as if the weight of his newfound responsibilities settled physically upon his shoulders. He would occasionally pause during discovery phases of new cases, a fleeting shadow crossing his face, remembering Andrew's precise way of articulating his rights, a stark contrast to the raw, often incoherent anger of his typical clients. Miguel, meanwhile, channeled his grief into keeping Andrew's spirit alive, sometimes attending the public lectures Miller gave discussing the importance of AIDS awareness, a subject Miller approached with a surprising, almost tender reverence, leaning heavily on the dignity Andrew exemplified rather than focusing purely on medical statistics. Miguel's presence was a silent, constant reminder to Miller of the stakes involved, grounding the abstract concept of discrimination in the tangible reality of love lost. He saw Miller's evolution not as a redemption, but as a necessary continuation of the fight Andrew had started. The courtroom had been Andrew's final stage, and Miller was now his chosen orator. The high-profile victory against the firm, while tragic in its timing, served as an unofficial, uncomfortable precedent in Philadelphia legal circles. Senior partners at the old firm spoke of the case in hushed, irritated tones, referring to it as an unfortunate public relations incident rather than a profound injustice exposed. Yet, even within those mahogany-paneled rooms, there was a measurable, if unspoken, caution. The certainty with which they had once operated, the assumption that they could discard the inconvenient without consequence, had been irrevocably challenged by the ferocity of Miller's unexpected championship. The film ends not on a note of triumphant societal overhaul, which would be far too neat, but on the quiet, persistent hum of change, driven by the memory of a brilliant man who refused to let his disease define his dignity, forcing two very different men to see the world and their roles within it anew. The quiet persistence of change manifested in the slow, almost imperceptible shifts in Miller's approach to legal practice. He began incorporating elements of meticulous preparation, mirroring Andrew's disciplined nature, into his own often impulsive courtroom strategy. It wasn't a wholesale adoption of the corporate lawyer's rigid formality, but rather an infusion of Andrew's respect for detail, ensuring that the emotional impact of his arguments was always underpinned by unassailable fact. This blending of styles made Miller an even more formidable opponent. His passion was now fortified by precision. Miguel, finding solace in action, became an unofficial consultant for Miller on matters requiring cultural understanding of the community affected by AIDS, a perspective Miller actively sought out. He recognized that his understanding of the disease was limited to the clinical and the legal, whereas Miguel possessed the intimate knowledge of the daily battles waged outside the courtroom, the discrimination in housing, the isolation. Their relationship evolved into a partnership built on shared grief and shared purpose, a quiet alliance against the apathy that Miller knew could be more insidious than outright malice. Looking back, Andrew's initial, desperate need to hide his condition underscored a fundamental truth about the era. Success often demanded a complete erasure of anything deemed other. His dream of climbing the legal ladder was predicated on fitting an outdated, narrow mold of professional identity. The firm's reaction wasn't just about fear of liability, it was about protecting the myth of their own pristine, untroubled success. Andrew, in forcing the issue into the public light, had shattered that illusion, even if only momentarily. The film's lasting impact resides in this dual portrait, the tragic short life of the brilliant, persecuted lawyer, and the unlikely evolution of the abrasive advocate who found his conscience through championing a cause initially so far removed from his commercial interests. The final image is one of enduring echo, the memory of Andrew's integrity serving as a necessary, painful spur for the living to continue demanding a more just, less fearful world. The echoes of the verdict didn't fade with the closing arguments. They lingered in the unspoken acknowledgments between Miller and Miguel, a fragile bridge constructed over the chasm of Andrew's absence. Miller, now possessing a reputation laced with unexpected righteousness, started dedicating significant pro bono time to cases mirroring Andrew's plight, viewing each one as a continuation of an unfinished conversation with his late client. He found a strange, almost paternal pride in dismantling the bureaucratic barriers that once crushed Andrew, learning to speak with the quiet authority Andrew commanded, rather than relying solely on his former aggressive volume. Miguel, observing Miller's commitment, saw not a savior, but a survivor who had found a meaningful way to carry the weight. He continued to provide Miller with the necessary human context, often challenging the lawyer when his approach became too detached or overly legalistic. Their bond deepened not through shared enjoyment, but through shared vigilance. They were the custodians of Andrew's truth, ensuring that the narrative surrounding his termination, the firm's flimsy excuses about performance, never overshadowed the reality of wrongful dismissal fueled by fear. In the corporate landscape Andrew once inhabited, a subtle but significant paranoia took root. Partners at the firm who had once felt untouchable now hesitated before making swift, ethically questionable personnel decisions. The Beckett case, though legally concluded, served as an open wound in their public image, a constant reminder that even the most polished facade could be violently stripped away by the glare of public scrutiny championed by a determined lawyer like Miller. They had learned expensively that ambition alone could not shield them from accountability when fundamental rights were at stake. The true enduring commentary of the narrative lies in how it exposed the chasm between professional aspiration and human necessity. Andrew's relentless pursuit of professional validation ultimately became the vehicle through which his essential humanity, his love, his illness, his right to equal treatment, was forced into the light. The film leaves us with the melancholic understanding that while legal victories can be attained, they rarely arrive in time to mend the deepest personal wounds, but they can, crucially, alter the landscape for those who follow, ensuring that the next aspiring young lawyer, whatever their private truth, might not have to fight quite so alone. The shadow of the trial eventually compelled even the most entrenched members of the legal community to reevaluate their own tacit complicity in the prevailing atmosphere of fear and silence surrounding AIDS. Miller's successes, built on the foundation of Andrew's sacrifice, began to slowly chip away at the edges of accepted professional dogma. Younger associates at the prestigious firm, ambitious yet perhaps more socially conscious than their superiors, started watching Miller's career trajectory with a mixture of awe and calculation, recognizing that true influence might eventually reside not in absolute conformity, but in a calculated willingness to defend the marginalized, provided the case was framed correctly. Miguel dedicated himself to advocacy groups, his personal tragedy lending a searing authenticity to his appeals for funding and awareness. He spoke not of abstract rights, but of the tangible, devastating moments Andrew endured, the coldness in the eyes of a colleague, the sudden cessation of camaraderie. These personal testimonies delivered by a grieving partner were far more effective than any dry legal brief in swaying public opinion and pressuring institutions toward greater compassion. He became a quiet, dignified figurehead, embodying the resilience the disease attempted, but ultimately failed, to extinguish from Andrew's spirit. Miller, meanwhile, found himself mentoring younger lawyers who were drawn to his newly tempered fire. He insisted they spend time understanding the human element of their cases, forcing them to sit in on community meetings, urging them to see past the legal paperwork to the shattered lives beneath. This education, paid for in the currency of Andrew's life, was a profound apprenticeship in empathy. He never stopped being aggressive, but his aggression was now systematically targeted at injustice, cleansed of the casual prejudice that had once tinted his own worldview. The film ultimately rests on the poignant irony that Andrew, forced out of the corporate arena for being too different, inadvertently forced that arena to acknowledge a broader spectrum of humanity. His brilliance, once suppressed by his illness, ironically provided the meticulous evidence needed to prove the very discrimination he suffered. The narrative concludes not with a neat bow, but with the lingering understanding that progress is often bought with immense personal suffering, and that the true measure of a life, even a tragically short one, is not the height of the professional pedestal reached, but the moral clarity achieved in the final, most difficult ascent. The very air in Philadelphia seemed to shift, subtly recalibrating around the aftermath of the verdict, an imperceptible tide turning that only those directly involved could truly sense. Miller found that his once casual disdain for certain societal norms had been replaced by a sharp, almost visceral intolerance for hypocrisy. When dealing with insurance adjusters or opposing counsel who employed veiled language designed to skirt the edges of decency, he would often see Andrew's strained composure in his mind's eye, and his response would become disproportionately fierce, rooted in a loyalty that transcended mere professional obligation. He was no longer just protecting a client, he was protecting a memory, ensuring that Andrew's final, courageous act of self-disclosure was not rendered meaningless by subsequent silence. Miguel's work with advocacy groups became his crucible, a place where the immense void left by Andrew was channeled into tangible action. He moved through the world with a newfound, quiet authority, no longer defined solely as the grieving partner, but as a survivor, advocating for systemic change. He often shared anecdotes, small moments of Andrew's life before the illness consumed him, perhaps a moment of pure joy over a difficult legal argument finally solved, or the simple pleasure of a shared meal, reclaiming Andrew's story from the sterile confines of the courtroom record. These memories serve to humanize the statistics, reminding activists and donors that the fight was for individuals, not just for abstract legal principles. Within the law firm itself, the ripples were more insidious. While the partners publicly maintained a facade of indifference, an internal dialogue had been irrevocably altered. Junior partners, eyeing the threat of future litigation catalyzed by Miller's success, began exercising a far more cautious vetting process in hiring and promotion, subtly steering away from overtly discriminatory practices, not out of sudden moral awakening, but out of acute self-preservation. The fear of being sued, of having their inner workings exposed to the brutal scrutiny of a lawyer like Miller, became a more effective regulatory force than any external legislation. The film's enduring power lies in this complex resolution. The victory was Pyrrhic for Andrew, yet transformative for those around him. It demonstrated that true merit, intellectual brilliance coupled with profound personal integrity, could not be entirely erased by prejudice, though the cost of proving that merit could be fatal. Andrew Beckett, the brilliant young man who strived for perfection in a world that demanded invisibility, left behind not a fortune or a partnership title, but a lasting, painful lesson etched into the professional conscience of a city, proving that sometimes the quietest dignity speaks the loudest truth. The narrative arc, therefore, settles into a sustained reflection on the aftermath, focusing on how the trauma of the trial reshaped the survivor's understanding of both justice and intimacy. Miller found that his aggressive courtroom persona, once a mechanism for securing fees, now served a higher, more exhausting purpose. He began to view every case through the lens of Andrew's experience, developing an almost obsessive need to uncover the hidden prejudices lurking beneath polished corporate veneers. He started demanding more from his own junior associates, forcing them to confront the human cost of legal inaction, often citing Andrew's unwavering commitment to detail as the benchmark for their preparation, even when arguing over a minor traffic dispute. It was an internalization of Andrew's meticulous, almost sacred approach to the law. Miguel, moving beyond the immediate shock of loss, began to work collaboratively with Miller on policy initiatives, attempting to translate the courtroom victory into tangible safeguards for others living with HIV. He never lost the quiet intensity that characterized him, a strength born from unwavering commitment to a partner whose life was prematurely extinguished. He saw the legal world as a necessary battleground, but found his true work in community building, ensuring that the social isolation Andrew endured was lessened for those who followed. Their interactions were spare, devoid of unnecessary pleasantries, yet underpinned by a deep, unspoken respect, the shared acknowledgement of having witnessed something shattering and surviving to tell the tale. The institutional memory of the firm, though deliberately vague, was perhaps the most telling societal marker. While they successfully shielded themselves from immediate legal embarrassment, the culture within those walls had been fractured. New partners were subtly coached to be less overtly dismissive, more careful in their language, recognizing that performance issues could easily be interpreted under the harsh light of post-Beckett scrutiny. It was an enforcement of caution, born not of enlightened morality, but of litigation fatigue and fear of exposure, a cynical form of grudging progress. Ultimately, the film leaves the audience with the profound realization that Andrew Beckett's life became a testament to integrity in the face of erasure. His career aspirations were devoured by the very system he sought to master, but in his final compelled act of defiance, the lawsuit, he managed to dismantle the unspoken rules that govern how society treats those who are vulnerable, different, or dying. His legacy is embedded in the cautious hesitation of the powerful and the renewed, sharp focus of the advocate who fought for him, a stark reminder that the fight for dignity is often the most demanding and necessary case of all. The narrative then shifts to the enduring, quiet presence of Andrew's art, which had been almost entirely sequestered during the years of his corporate ascent. Miguel, finally ready to confront the canvases Andrew had abandoned or hidden, began to curate a small, private exhibition, not in a grand gallery, but in a modest community space that actively served those marginalized by the mainstream. These paintings, vibrant and intense, spoke a language Andrew could no longer articulate verbally. They revealed the emotional textures and hidden complexities that the cold precision of legal briefs could never capture. Swirling colors representing his internal struggle, sharp architectural lines depicting the rigid confines of the firm, and breathtaking, tender portraits of Miguel that showcased the private world the firm had attempted to delegitimize. Miller attended this small opening feeling utterly out of place amidst the artists and activists, yet profoundly rooted in the space. Seeing the raw, unmediated emotion on the canvases was more revealing than any deposition. He understood then the depth of what Andrew had sacrificed, the vibrant inner life suffocated by the necessity of professional camouflage. It was here, standing before a powerful, almost abstract depiction of the discovery phase, a canvas violently striated with black and white, that Miller finally grasped the full scope of Andrew's suffering, recognizing it not as a legal complication, but as a visceral attack on his very soul. This confrontation with Andrew's artistic self spurred Miller to a new form of advocacy, using narrative and imagery to convey injustice. He started incorporating visual aids, not just charts, into his closings, learning from Andrew's hidden artistic language how to bypass pure logic and appeal directly to the jury's sense of human recognition. He understood that the defense had tried to present Andrew as a sterile legal entity compromised by illness. Miguel and Miller, through the art, presented Andrew as a whole, passionate, and vital human being whose talent was simply inconvenient to his employers. The final, lingering scene often depicts Miguel and Miller sharing a moment of quiet understanding near one of Andrew's more hopeful pieces, perhaps a landscape bathed in an imagined clear sunlight. They are two men who found a common purpose on the battlefield of a courtroom, united by the memory of the man whose fight cost him everything, but ultimately redefined their own sense of obligation. Andrew Beckett's life, cut tragically short, becomes the enduring masterpiece, a devastating indictment of a system that values conformity over brilliance and a quiet, powerful blueprint for moral resistance. The light in the community space, filtered through the uneven panes of glass and colored by Andrew's passionate canvases, seemed warmer, truer than the harsh, fluorescent glare of the courtroom that had once judged him. For Miguel, tending to the exhibit became a form of sustained communion. He would often straighten a frame or dust a corner of a painting, his movements imbued with the protective tenderness he once reserved for Andrew in the sterile confines of their apartment during his worst fevers. He noticed how the art world, initially cautious and perhaps wary of the sensationalism surrounding the lawsuit, responded to the work's sheer, undeniable talent. Andrew's life, which had been narrowed by his illness and the legal fight, exploded outward through his creativity, demanding respect on terms entirely independent of his career or his condition. Miller's transformation was palpable in these quieter spaces. He arrived at the exhibition not in his usual tailored armor, but in slightly softer attire, his posture less aggressively squared. He absorbed the artwork with a focus he usually reserved for dissecting contradictory testimony. He saw the early, tightly controlled pieces reflecting his tenure at the firm, precise, almost brittle compositions, and then the later works, where the palette exploded into chaotic, urgent colors, mirrors of the internal rupture Andrew experienced. Miller realized that Andrew hadn't simply had a life outside the law. His art was his life, the one part of himself he could control absolutely when everything else, his career, his health, his privacy, was being systematically stripped away. This recognition fueled a new resolve in Miller. He began leveraging the visual legacy of Andrew in his ongoing cases. When opposing counsel attempted to minimize a client's suffering by reducing them to mere medical charts or deposition transcripts, Miller would present carefully selected imagery, photographs, even artistic renderings commissioned to explain complex trauma, drawing a direct line back to the power of Andrew's self-portrayal. He was teaching juries and his own protégés that facts alone were insufficient. The emotional architecture of a life needed to be rendered visible for true justice to occur. The final lingering sentiment surrounding Andrew Beckett was not one of defeat, but of profound, reluctant significance. He was the cautionary tale whispered among ambitious young lawyers hoping to make partner, a warning against the firm's toxic culture. But more importantly, he was a quiet inspiration to those working outside the established corridors of power. Miguel and Miller, disparate men bound by a shared, terrible intimacy with Andrew's truth, stood as living evidence that even when the system grinds a person down, the essence of their stand can echo far beyond the final gavel strike, ensuring that the battle for recognition is never truly over. The echoes of Andrew's art and the lessons extracted from his suffering began to subtly infiltrate the very fabric of Miller's professional life, manifesting as a deep, almost spiritual commitment to the integrity of the testimonial process. He became notoriously relentless in cross-examination, not just to break a witness but to expose the moral architecture supporting their testimony. He sought the inherent truth buried beneath layers of legal jargon and corporate obfuscation, driven by the memory of how ruthlessly the defense had tried to dismantle Andrew's credibility by attacking his private life. When a witness tried to evade a direct question, Miller would pause, his eyes distant for a beat, and then ask with a voice dangerously soft, "Can you state that clearly, for the record? Let's make sure your statement is as unambiguous as Mr. Beckett's final wishes were." Miguel, finding a measure of peace in the continuous visibility of Andrew's legacy, started collaborating with Miller on a non-profit foundation established in Andrew's name, aimed at providing legal support for individuals facing similar discrimination based on health status or sexual orientation. Miguel, though never comfortable in the spotlight, learned to deliver measured, impactful speeches at fundraising events. His grief had forged him into an unlikely orator. He spoke less of the lawsuit and more of the simple, profound need for dignity, how the fear of losing one's job because of who one loves or how one is sick is a form of slow societal strangulation. His face, though forever marked by sorrow, radiated an unflinching honesty that cut through the polite skepticism of potential donors. The former law firm continued its slow process of internal recalibration. The partners, still smarting from the financial hit and the public relations stain, instituted mandatory, if poorly attended, diversity and sensitivity seminars. These sessions were sterile, transactional affairs, entirely missing the fiery personal conviction that Miller and Miguel brought to the subject. Yet even this rote compliance signaled a shift. The firm recognized that the landscape had changed. The absolute impunity they once enjoyed was gone. They were performing sensitivity, not embodying it, a testament to the power of external pressure trumping internal morality. The final chapter of this sustained aftermath is written in the quiet resilience of these two men. Miller, the cynical litigator, found a sense of purpose that no partnership track could ever have offered, his brusque exterior softened by a core of profound respect. Miguel, the heartbroken partner, transformed his personal devastation into a public scaffolding for others. Their connection remained a study in contrasts, the sharp legal mind tempered by raw personal loss, but it was unbreakably strong. Andrew Beckett's life didn't end in quiet obscurity, but in a loud, demanding flash that forced a reckoning, leaving behind a legacy not of bitterness, but of the hard-won understanding that true heroism often involves nothing more dramatic than refusing to disappear when the world demands you vanish. The establishment of the Beckett Foundation marked the crystallization of their efforts, transforming the ephemeral resonance of the verdict into something tangible and enduring. Miller poured his considerable legal acumen into structuring the foundation, ensuring that its charter was bulletproof against the bureaucratic obfuscation he knew could easily undermine charitable efforts intended to disrupt the status quo. He treated the foundation's paperwork with the same meticulous fervor he had once reserved for high-stakes mergers, understanding that legal infrastructure was the only true shield against future persecution. Miguel served as the foundation's conscience and primary liaison to the affected communities. He cultivated an almost encyclopedic knowledge of local institutional failures, able to pinpoint precisely where funding and advocacy could dismantle systemic barriers. He developed a particular expertise in navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy of healthcare access for uninsured individuals, his direct experience with Andrew's later struggles providing an unshakable clarity regarding procedural cruelty. He carried not anger, but a persistent, focused determination, his eyes holding the steady gaze of someone who has stared into the abyss and chosen to build a bridge across it. The contrast between Miller's polished, sometimes intimidating presence in the courtroom and Miguel's gentle yet firm demeanor at community workshops became the foundation's unexpected strength. Miller provided the necessary aggression to challenge restrictive policies legally, while Miguel ensured the policies being challenged were rooted in genuine human needs, not abstract legal theory. Their partnership, forged in shared grief, became a powerful dialectic, the hard edge of the law sharpened by the soft, undeniable truth of personal experience. Years passed, and the initial sting of the trial faded into institutional history, yet the foundation remained a quiet thorn in the side of complacency. The former firm, having long since promoted new partners over the ashes of the Beckett case, occasionally found itself on the opposing side of a minor employment dispute where the Beckett Foundation was involved. These encounters were always strained. The opposing counsel knew Miller was fighting not for billable hours, but for a principle cemented in a painful history. The victories they secured were rarely splashy, often involving quiet settlements or procedural changes, but they accumulated, creating a slow, undeniable softening of the city's professional landscape, a gradual acclimatization to the idea that empathy was not a liability, but a necessary component of modern jurisprudence. The film's final resonant note is drawn from a brief, unscripted moment between the two men years later. They are reviewing grant applications in Miller's expanded, yet still functionally modest office. Miller leans back, a tired but satisfied look on his face, and murmurs, "We never got him that partnership, did we?" Miguel, signing off on a grant to fund emergency housing, glances up, a faint smile touching his lips. "No," he replies softly, tapping the document, "but we got a hell of a lot more important things for him." The true legacy wasn't the vindication of one man's career, but the quiet, persistent construction of a world where another man like Andrew might not have to choose between his life and his truth. The 1993 film Philadelphia, directed by Jonathan Demme, stands as a watershed moment in mainstream cinema, primarily for its unflinching yet deeply empathetic examination of AIDS-related prejudice and institutional homophobia in late 1980s America. The narrative centers on Andrew Beckett, portrayed by Tom Hanks, a talented young associate at a prestigious corporate law firm in Philadelphia who is systematically fired upon the discovery of his HIV status. This dismissal triggers a civil rights lawsuit, bringing him into contact with Joe Miller, a homophobic personal injury lawyer played brilliantly by Denzel Washington, who reluctantly agrees to take the case. Hanks's portrayal of Andrew is crucial to the film's success. He embodies a character striving for normalcy and professional excellence even as his body betrays him. Beckett is not merely a victim, he is an ambitious, intelligent professional whose identity has been unfairly reduced to a medical diagnosis by his employers. Hanks, fresh off his Oscar win for Philadelphia, his first, was making a profound statement about his versatility and willingness to tackle challenging, career-defining roles. His physical transformation and nuanced depiction of the slow deterioration caused by the illness were widely praised, forcing audiences accustomed to sanitized portrayals of disease to confront the human reality of AIDS. The dramatic arc pivots on the necessary, uncomfortable alliance between Beckett and Miller. Miller initially embodies the prevalent societal fear and ignorance surrounding the epidemic. Washington's performance is remarkable because he allows the audience to witness Miller's prejudice as a learned behavior, rooted in a lack of education and exposure, rather than inherent malice. The gradual thawing of Miller's animosity is gradual and believable, spurred by the sheer injustice of Beckett's firing and the undeniable competence Beckett displays even while visibly ill. This character development mirrors a subtle, broader societal shift that Demme was trying to encourage, moving from fear to empathy through personal connection. Demme's directorial choices reinforce the film's themes of isolation and eventual connection. The visual language often isolates Andrew, using long shots in towering, cold corporate offices to emphasize his powerlessness within the established structure. When Andrew finally finds a sense of community and acceptance, often outside the professional sphere, such as in the vibrant, albeit sometimes marginalized gay communities depicted, the lighting softens and the framing becomes warmer. The recurring motifs of music, particularly the use of opera and classical pieces that Andrew loves, serve as a constant reminder of his inner life and intellectual depth, things that his firm attempted to erase. The film was inspired in part by the real-life experiences of several individuals, including Jeffrey Bowers, a lawyer who died of AIDS-related complications and whose estate filed a similar suit. These real-world echoes lend a necessary gravity to the drama. Furthermore, the casting of Mary Steenburgen as Belinda Conine, the compassionate lawyer who ultimately champions Beckett's cause, provides the necessary moral backbone when Miller is still wavering. Her character represents the ethical responsibility that the legal profession often fails to uphold. The impact of Philadelphia cannot be overstated. Released at a time when fear of casual contact with HIV-positive individuals was still widespread, the film placed a sympathetic, articulate, middle-class professional at the center of a major Hollywood production. It was one of the first major studio films to explicitly address the AIDS crisis and homophobia head-on, opening doors for more complex portrayals in subsequent decades. By framing the legal battle as a fight for basic workplace dignity and civil rights, rather than solely as a health crisis narrative, Demme ensured the story resonated across diverse audiences, forcing a difficult but ultimately necessary public conversation. The film remains a potent document of a specific cultural moment, capturing the fear, the resilience, and the slow, painful emergence of empathy. The central tension of Philadelphia is expertly woven into the visual contrast between the characters' backgrounds and their developing professional respect. Andrew Beckett's world, characterized by crisp suits, meticulous organization, and the hushed reverence of high-stakes litigation, is violently disrupted. His initial scenes show him thriving, a man whose mind is his sharpest weapon. When the revelation of his diagnosis occurs, the environment, once his domain, becomes hostile. The way the partners dismiss him, often avoiding eye contact or physically stepping away, speaks volumes about the pervasive, unspoken fear that governed social and professional interactions during that era. It wasn't just termination, it was social erasure enacted by powerful men. Hanks, leveraging his emerging status as a leading dramatic actor following his earlier, lighter roles, committed fully to the physical manifestation of Andrew's struggle. His initial presentation is of a man meticulously controlling every aspect of his life, a control that slowly slips away as the Kaposi's sarcoma lesions begin to mark his skin. This visual decline is handled with a rare maturity for mainstream cinema. Demme ensures that the camera lingers not cruelly but truthfully, forcing the viewer to witness the cost of systemic prejudice when combined with physical illness. Andrew's quiet dignity, even when facing insurmountable obstacles like the firm destroying evidence, makes his eventual quiet triumphs profoundly moving. Denzel Washington's Joe Miller is the crucial bridge to the mainstream audience. Miller is introduced as a man deeply entrenched in the conventional wisdom of his community, a husband and father whose immediate reaction to Beckett is suspicion tinged with genuine, if misguided, fear. Washington masterfully plays the internal conflict. He is a lawyer driven by a sense of justice for the common person, yet that sense is initially clouded by ingrained prejudice against homosexuality and the association of AIDS with marginalized groups. The turning point in their relationship often occurs through small moments of shared humanity. Miller witnessing the visceral impact of the disease on Beckett, or seeing Beckett's unwavering commitment to meticulous legal preparation despite being hospitalized. The scene where Miller finally confronts the source of his own biases, often prompted by his wife or through his own observation of Beckett's intellect, is less a dramatic explosion and more a slow, dawning comprehension, mirroring the educational purpose of the film itself. The film's emotional resonance is heightened by the tender portrayal of the relationship between Andrew and his partner, Miguel, played by Antonio Banderas. While the primary focus is the legal battle, the moments shared between Andrew and Miguel, the quiet evenings, the struggle to maintain intimacy amidst sickness, provide the necessary emotional anchor. These scenes assert the validity and normalcy of their love, pushing back against the narrative that viewed homosexual relationships as inherently deviant or transient. Miguel's presence grounds Andrew's fight in a tangible desire for a shared future, however short that future may prove to be. The soundtrack, featuring Bruce Springsteen's Oscar-winning song, Streets of Philadelphia, perfectly captures the film's mood, a sense of profound loneliness juxtaposed against a determined journey through an alienating urban landscape. The lyrics echo the alienation Beckett feels, walking through the very city streets where he once expected to build a celebrated career. Philadelphia succeeded not just by telling a story about a man with AIDS, but by framing that story within the context of American civil rights law, ensuring that the conversation extended beyond public health concerns to fundamental issues of employment equity and human dignity. The structure of the courtroom drama serves as a powerful metaphor for the societal battle Beckett wages. The legal system, traditionally the supposed bastion of objective fairness, is revealed to be just another institution susceptible to the same biases that plague the broader culture. The defense attorneys representing the law firm employ tactics designed to shame and degrade Andrew, focusing obsessively on his private life and sexuality, rather than the clear evidence of discriminatory termination. This strategy of character assassination, common in historical civil rights challenges, highlights how marginalized individuals are often forced to defend their entire existence rather than the specific violation of their rights. Jonathan Demme's directorial signature, his insistence on direct address and close-ups, is particularly impactful here. When characters speak to the camera, it often feels as if they are speaking directly to the jury, or indeed, to the viewer sitting at home. This technique breaks the fourth wall emotionally, demanding complicity from the audience in judging the proceedings. When Andrew, visibly weakened but resolute, testifies about his passion for law and his humiliation at the hands of his former colleagues, the camera holds tight on his face, forcing an intimacy that bypasses intellectual defenses and appeals directly to human recognition. Hanks's commitment extended beyond the physical toll. It involved understanding the specific psychology of living under a death sentence while trying to maintain the facade of professional ambition. Andrew Beckett is fighting to control the narrative of his own life, striving to ensure that his legacy is defined by his intelligence and dedication, not by the virus that ultimately claims him. His quiet moments of frustration, such as when he struggles to open a simple bottle of water due to failing strength, are agonizing because they underscore the erasure of his autonomy. Washington's performance as Miller undergoes its most significant transformation during the cross-examinations. As Miller is forced by the facts and by Beckett's eloquent defense to confront the absurdity of the firm's position, his visceral discomfort shifts into righteous indignation on behalf of his client. The scene where Miller finally stands up for Andrew against an overtly prejudiced statement from the opposing counsel marks the crystallization of his moral awakening. He moves from seeing Beckett as a legal problem to recognizing him as a wronged man whose rights are being trampled, reflecting a shift often seen in allies who move past abstract tolerance to active advocacy. Furthermore, the subtle depiction of the Philadelphia community that embraces Andrew is vital. The moments spent with his doctors, the small gatherings with friends, and the solace found in music represent pockets of humanity insulated from the cold corporate world. These scenes showcase resilience and chosen family, a theme historically critical to the survival narratives of marginalized communities facing institutional hostility. The film subtly argues that while the established structures may fail individuals, community bonds provide the essential scaffolding for endurance. Philadelphia remains a benchmark not just for its subject matter, but for its successful merging of a personal tragedy with a high-stakes legal thriller, ensuring the dialogue about AIDS and civil rights was embedded firmly within the mainstream cultural consciousness. The lingering impact of Philadelphia stems significantly from its brave confrontation with the intersection of societal phobia and professional power, a narrative structure that resonates deeply with historical struggles for equality. The film cleverly uses the corporate law firm A&B as a microcosm of entrenched American conservatism and fear. The partners, particularly the unseen but heavily implied leadership, operate under a code of absolute discretion and self-preservation, believing that association with HIV, especially in a successful, high-stakes environment, constitutes financial and reputational contamination. Their actions are driven by a chilling pragmatism, removing the problem to maintain an image of sanitized success. This defense strategy, the weaponization of privacy, is where the film gains much of its emotional voltage. The opposing counsel attempts to reduce Beckett's life to a series of salacious details, implying that his private conduct somehow invalidates his professional achievements or even justifies his firing. This tactic is designed to elicit revulsion from the jury, playing directly into the pervasive misinformation that conflated homosexuality and HIV infection with moral failing or unreliability. Andrew Beckett is fighting not just for his job, but for the right to have a private life that is not subject to public inquisition simply because he contracted a disease prevalent in a stigmatized community. Tom Hanks's performance, which garnered him his first Academy Award, is a masterclass in controlled vulnerability. He navigates the physical deterioration with a profound sense of self-possession. There are subtle visual cues, perhaps a slight tremor in his hand while signing a document, or the way he consciously straightens his posture to mask fatigue, that communicate the exhausting daily effort required to simply appear normal. This dedication to maintaining his professional facade, even as his body fails him, speaks volumes about the psychological toll of fighting a battle on two fronts, one against the virus, the other against overwhelming bigotry. Denzel Washington, whose career was already marked by roles demanding both authority and moral complexity, gives Miller an essential ambiguity. Initially, Miller views the case through the lens of his own conservative world, perhaps believing the firm's claims that Beckett was simply unreliable, or that his condition was somehow a breach of professional contract. The slow erosion of this viewpoint is marked by Miller's growing respect for Beckett's meticulous preparation. The evidence of Beckett's capability becomes undeniable, overriding the abstract fear. The pivotal moments where Miller shows genuine advocacy are often small, a sharp retort to a biased line of questioning or an insistence on proper procedure, signaling that he is beginning to apply the principles of law equally, a concept that had previously excluded those outside his immediate social circle. The synergy between the central actors, moving from mutual distrust to a powerful, albeit strictly professional, interdependence, anchors the film's ultimate message of alliance. It posits that true societal change often occurs not through sweeping legislation alone, but through the difficult human process of individuals learning to see past stereotypes. Philadelphia remains a crucial cinematic text because it dared to make the personal political, using the high-stakes environment of corporate litigation to expose the very real human cost of fear masquerading as acceptable business practice. The film's commitment to illustrating the devastating impact of stigma extends beyond the courtroom into the very fabric of Andrew Beckett's personal support system. The unwavering love provided by Miguel, while often relegated to brief, poignant scenes, serves as the emotional bedrock against the harsh realities of his professional life. Banderas portrays Miguel not as a mere grieving partner, but as an active participant in Andrew's fight for dignity, embodying the resilience found in chosen families when biological or societal structures fail to offer comfort. Their interactions ground the abstract legal battle in tangible stakes: the right to grieve, the right to love openly, and the right to a peaceful end supported by those who truly see the person, not the diagnosis. The juxtaposition of the bleak, isolating atmosphere of the corporate world with the small, vibrant sanctuaries of support is a deliberate directorial choice by Demi. When Andrew seeks respite, whether in the company of his friends, enjoying opera, or seeking medical care, the visual palette shifts. The cold, unforgiving blues and grays of A and B give way to warmer tones, suggesting that true community exists outside the structures designed to exclude him. This contrast reinforces the film's central argument, that the illness itself is manageable compared to the societal condemnation that amplifies its suffering. Hanks's portrayal is particularly lauded for its restraint during the final stages of Andrew's illness. He avoids melodrama, instead presenting a portrait of quiet exhaustion and unyielding principle. When Andrew finally addresses the jury, his voice carries the weight of his experience, transforming his physical vulnerability into moral authority. This climactic moment is effective precisely because the audience has witnessed the relentless chipping away at his strength. His composure under pressure becomes an act of profound resistance. It is the triumph of intellect and spirit over bigotry, even as physical defeat looms. For Denzel Washington, the journey of Joe Miller is one of realizing a deeper meaning of justice. Miller's initial reluctance fades as he is forced to examine his own ingrained biases under the glaring light of incontrovertible evidence. His growth is not instantaneous. It is a series of small concessions to reason and decency. When Miller begins to passionately defend Beckett's rights against the opposing counsel's smear tactics, it signifies his successful assimilation of empathy. He has moved from viewing Beckett as a representative of a feared demographic to defending an individual whose rights have been egregiously violated. This transformation makes Miller a relatable figure for the audience members who might have entered the cinema sharing some of Miller's initial skepticism or fear. Ultimately, Philadelphia functioned as a necessary cultural intervention. By employing the familiar and trusted framework of a Hollywood legal drama, Demi managed to sanitize the subject matter just enough to be palatable to a mass audience, while simultaneously using that platform to deliver a searing critique of contemporary prejudice. The film's power lies in its ability to force viewers to sit in uncomfortable proximity to the reality of AIDS during a period of intense national denial, ensuring that the conversation about civil rights expanded to include those suffering from the epidemic under the banner of simple human dignity. The enduring power of Philadelphia is rooted in its successful reframing of a health crisis as a fundamental civil rights issue, skillfully utilizing the language and setting of corporate law. This strategy allowed the film to bypass what might have been a purely medical or niche dramatic exploration, thrusting the complexities of discrimination directly into the American mainstream narrative. The law firm, A&B, functions as a powerful symbol of traditional American gatekeepers, institutions valuing reputation and perceived stability above ethical responsibility or human life. Their decision to terminate Andrew Beckett is portrayed less as a compassionate separation due to illness and more as a calculated act of corporate self-preservation, a chilling testament to how capitalism can rationalize prejudice. Tom Hanks's dedication to portraying Andrew's physical decline was carefully calibrated to avoid sensationalism, opting instead for a raw depiction of struggle that felt painfully authentic. His transformation required deep research into the manifestations of AIDS-related illnesses, forcing audiences to confront the reality that HIV did not discriminate based on career success or intelligence. Andrew's refusal to relinquish his meticulous habits, even when his motor skills are failing, is a defiant assertion of selfhood. He insists on being judged by the quality of his legal briefs, not the state of his immune system, embedding a quiet resistance into every scene. This control over his narrative became his final, most potent legal argument. Denzel Washington's Joe Miller serves as the audience's surrogate for learning and overcoming ingrained societal biases. Miller is not initially an antagonist in the pure sense. He is simply a product of his environment, one where fear of the unknown surrounding AIDS was weaponized by social stigma. Washington's brilliance lies in showing Miller's transformation as a reluctant, almost involuntary response to undeniable injustice. His progression is marked by moments where his legal instinct for fairness overrides his personal discomfort. Watching Beckett endure humiliating cross-examinations compels Miller to see the man beneath the diagnosis. This character arc mirrors the necessary, often uncomfortable educational process required for widespread social acceptance, moving from abstract fear to concrete empathy catalyzed by witnessing personal suffering. The film masterfully uses the legal process to expose hypocrisy. Every attempt by the defense to invade Beckett's privacy or suggest moral turpitude is a thinly veiled effort to avoid confronting the clear breach of contract and discriminatory intent. Mary Steenburgen's Belinda Conine, the empathetic co-counsel, provides the steady, ethically uncompromised voice that Miller initially lacks. Conine represents the professional and moral responsibility that the partners at A&B willfully abandoned. Her compassion is not pity, it is a firm application of legal and ethical standards, recognizing Beckett's inherent dignity as a plaintiff. The emotional core, sustained by the relationship with Miguel and the scenes showcasing Andrew's friendships, grounds the high-stakes drama. These moments of genuine affection and shared vulnerability provide the necessary counterpoint to the sterile, antagonistic courtroom setting. They confirm what the film implicitly argues, that the disease strips away societal artifice, revealing the essential human need for connection and affirmation. Philadelphia remains a significant artifact because it managed to bridge the chasm between marginalized experience and mainstream viewership, using the structure of a triumphant legal victory to illuminate the vast, ongoing struggle for equality and visibility. The film's resolution, while offering a legal victory for Andrew Beckett, is carefully tempered to reflect the limitations of achieving justice within flawed systems. The substantial monetary settlement obtained by Beckett and Miller, while providing financial security, cannot restore the years of professional opportunity stolen from him, nor can it fully erase the public humiliation endured. This bittersweet conclusion is crucial. It acknowledges that while the law can impose consequences on overtly discriminatory behavior, it cannot instantly heal deep-seated societal prejudices. The victory is symbolic and personal, rather than a wholesale eradication of homophobia or AIDS stigma in corporate America. Hanks's final scenes, particularly his appearance in court, highlight this dichotomy between personal spirit and physical reality. There is an ethereal quality to Andrew as the illness progresses, suggesting a man who has transcended the petty battles of the firm and is now fighting purely on principle. His quiet perseverance in the face of devastating physical decline serves as the film's most potent ethical statement, that a person's intrinsic worth is inviolable, regardless of their health status or sexual orientation. His legacy, defined by the courage of his lawsuit, becomes greater than the legal career he was denied. Washington's Miller experiences the most profound, lasting internal shift. His willingness to publicly advocate for Andrew and his visible discomfort with the defense's cruel tactics marks his graduation from cautious lawyer to committed ally. This evolution is what made the film resonant for broader audiences. Miller's journey provided a safe pathway for viewers wrestling with their own preconceptions. His eventual respect for Beckett transcends professional courtesy, blossoming into a shared understanding of systemic injustice. It is through Miller that the film suggests reform begins, not with the marginalized demanding change, but with those in positions of cultural power choosing to see differently. The enduring controversy surrounding the film's depiction of the gay community warrants examination. While Philadelphia was groundbreaking for bringing an HIV-positive protagonist into prime time, critics noted that Andrew Beckett was deliberately sanitized, articulate, professionally successful, and conventionally attractive to appeal to cautious viewers. This focus on a palatable victim arguably shielded the film from alienating mainstream sensibilities, yet it also necessarily omitted the harsher realities faced by poorer or more visibly non-conforming members of the LGBTQ+ community who were disproportionately affected by both the epidemic and police harassment. Demme walked a fine line, prioritizing broad accessibility over granular specificity in depicting the crisis's full spectrum. In conclusion, Philadelphia is less a story about winning a lawsuit and more about the arduous, necessary work of forcing America to look at a crisis it preferred to ignore. By centering the narrative on a white, educated, middle-class professional, the film strategically utilized the established structures of Hollywood and the legal drama genre to force empathy. It remains a vital piece of filmmaking because it successfully transformed personal tragedy into a public declaration about civil rights, setting a precedent for how Hollywood could engage with painful, politically charged contemporary issues with nuance and emotional gravity. The film's success in forcing a dialogue is intrinsically linked to its careful framing of Andrew Beckett's character as intellectually formidable, thereby countering the deeply ingrained stereotype of the AIDS patient as someone intellectually or morally compromised. Beckett's knowledge of the law becomes his shield and his sword. He is not just fighting for reinstatement, he is asserting the intellectual parity that his employers tried to deny him the moment they discovered his illness. This is crucial because, historically, challenges to entrenched power structures require protagonists who are unimpeachable in the arena defined by the oppressor. In this case, the courtroom. Hanks embodies this tension, showing a man whose mind remains razor-sharp even as his physical control wanes, making his eventual reliance on his legal team, particularly Conine and Miller, a necessary surrender to the human limitations imposed by disease. The courtroom scenes, particularly the cross-examinations, are masterclasses in emotional manipulation designed to elicit condemnation from the jury and the viewer. When Beckett is questioned about his social life, the camera often focuses tightly on Denzel Washington's Miller, whose increasing agitation mirrors the audience's own rising sense of outrage. Miller is tasked with defending the right to privacy in a culture obsessed with policing morality. Washington brilliantly portrays the lawyer's cognitive dissonance. His professional mandate requires him to champion the facts of the contract violation, but his burgeoning moral awakening requires him to defend Beckett's entire personhood against the invasive cruelty of the defense. This internal battle within Miller, the erosion of his inherited prejudice, is perhaps the film's most subtle and significant achievement, providing a roadmap for how allyship is forged through direct confrontation with injustice. The influence of figures like Jonathan Demme, known for his empathetic gaze in films such as The Silence of the Lambs, where he skillfully navigated complex power dynamics and morality, is evident in the film's unblinking but compassionate visual style. Demme uses the camera not just to observe, but to compel witnessing. The close-ups on the faces of those suffering, Andrew, his partner Miguel, and the others in the community, demand recognition that transcends categorization. This visual insistence on the humanity of the afflicted was a radical act in 1993 Hollywood, challenging the prevalent media portrayal of AIDS victims often relegated to anonymous statistics or figures of fear. Furthermore, the musical score deserves specific attention as an emotional amplifier integrated into the narrative structure. The recurring presence of opera, particularly Maria Callas's soaring arias, functions as Andrew's private sanctuary, a space of purity and profound emotional expression untouched by the ugliness of the lawsuit or the physical deterioration. When Andrew is struggling, The music often swells, reminding the viewer of the rich, complex inner life that the corporate world attempted to dismiss as irrelevant or shameful. This artistic choice elevates the film beyond mere social commentary into a genuine character study about preserving one's inner world against external forces determined to erase it. Philadelphia thus stands as a foundational text in how Hollywood began to address systemic discrimination, using the framework of high-stakes drama to educate and provoke necessary, albeit painful, national reflection. The film's resolution, while undeniably cathartic in its legal conclusion, harbors a profound sense of melancholy that prevents it from devolving into mere Hollywood triumphalism. Andrew Beckett does not walk out of the courtroom miraculously cured, nor does he return to his former life of high-powered corporate maneuvering. Instead, the settlement signifies an acknowledgement of the crime committed against him, a necessary validation of his dignity rather than a complete reversal of his fate. This carefully constructed ambiguity ensures that the audience leaves contemplating the persistent, systemic barriers that remain even after a legal victory is secured. The money offers comfort and time, but it cannot rewind the clock on the time lost to illness and institutional isolation. Hanks, in the culmination of his Oscar-winning performance, strips away the last vestiges of the ambitious young lawyer, leaving only a man grappling with mortality and a desire for fundamental fairness. His final moments, particularly the quiet dignity shown when interacting with Miller after the verdict, are imbued with a sense of earned peace. He has successfully forced his oppressors to acknowledge his worth on his own terms. This quiet victory over the ego-driven partners who sought to destroy him speaks to the power of nonviolent, principled resistance. His legacy becomes intrinsically tied to the legal precedent set, ensuring that future professionals might face less institutionalized terror. Denzel Washington's Joe Miller ultimately embodies the concept of a changed heart guided by professional ethics. His final scenes suggest a man irrevocably altered by the experience of defending a client whom society, and initially he himself, deemed unworthy of defense. Miller's aggressive pursuit of justice in the trial morphs into a personal commitment to advocacy. This shift validates the film's central thesis, that bigotry often dissolves when confronted directly with the unwavering humanity of its target, especially when that humanity is framed within a context, the law that Miller respects. The professional partnership forged in adversity becomes a symbol of a potential future where empathy overrides prejudice in professional settings. Moreover, the role of Belinda Conine, the lawyer who champions Andrew's cause with unwavering ethical clarity, provides the necessary moral counterbalance to Miller's initial reluctance and the firm's corruption. Steenburgen portrays Conine not as a saint, but as a professional wholly committed to the ethos of justice. She operates with a directness that bypasses the personal prejudices that temporarily cloud Miller's judgment, serving as the constant moral compass of the plaintiff's team. Her presence assures the audience that Andrew's fight is being championed by competent, ethically sound individuals, making his vulnerability in the face of the firm's smear tactics all the more egregious. Philadelphia transcends its initial designation as an AIDS film. It is a foundational text on workplace discrimination and the courage required to challenge power structures defined by exclusion. Its genius lies in translating the abstract concepts of civil rights, equal protection and due process, into the deeply felt emotional reality of one man's struggle to maintain his identity amidst physical collapse. The film's resonance persists because the battle for professional dignity against fear-based corporate policy remains a timeless, ongoing struggle in the American landscape. The film's innovative use of genre, marrying the high-stakes tension of a courtroom procedural with the intimate tragedy of a terminal illness, allowed it to explore complex socio-political themes without sacrificing commercial accessibility. Jonathan Demme carefully engineered the narrative so that the legal proceedings became the primary vehicle for addressing societal failures regarding the AIDS crisis. The defense lawyer's strategy, focusing on insinuations about Beckett's private life and alleged unprofessionalism, mirrored the real-world media and political discourse of the era, which often sought to blame victims for their affliction rather than addressing the systemic failures in healthcare and social support. This tactic forces the audience, alongside Joe Miller, to actively reject the notion that a person's private choices negate their right to fair employment. Tom Hanks's performance throughout the trial showcases Andrew's intellectual rigor as his final defense mechanism. When facing aggressive questioning about his medical history, Andrew's responses are concise, fact-based, and delivered with a weary defiance. He transforms his testimony from a defense of his character into a legal indictment of the firm's discriminatory intent. The sheer exhaustion visible on his face during these intense confrontations underscores the immense personal cost of fighting this legal battle, a fight he would not have chosen, but one he faced with an almost ascetic dedication. This embodiment of intellectual resistance against physical decline remains one of the film's most enduring images. Denzel Washington's Joe Miller experiences a powerful, subtle transformation catalyzed by professional obligation morphing into moral conviction. His initial interactions with Andrew are characterized by a palpable, though unspoken, distance, a professional hedging against a perceived contagion. However, the moment Miller is forced to confront the sheer absurdity and cruelty of the defense's attempts to smear his client, his reaction shifts. The transition is evident in his body language. The rigid posture softens, replaced by an energized, protective stance as he begins to rebut the prejudiced lines of questioning with genuine legal fervor. Miller's advocacy becomes personal, not because he suddenly understands the virus, but because he recognizes the brutal application of unjust power against an individual fighting honorably. The film also excels in depicting the supportive network that exists outside the mainstream's judgmental view. The scenes featuring Andrew's doctors and his partner Miguel offer vital counter-narratives to the cold, calculating environment of the law firm. These moments emphasize that life persists, love endures, and care is given outside the confines of institutional acceptance. Miguel, in particular, represents the intimate, everyday labor of caregiving that underpinned the survival of countless individuals during the epidemic, a crucial aspect often rendered invisible in mainstream media narratives focusing solely on high-profile legal fights. Ultimately, Philadelphia succeeded not by offering easy answers, but by demanding recognition of a marginalized group's struggle through a widely accepted cultural framework. By using the narrative conventions of a legal drama, clues, cross-examinations, and a climactic verdict, Demi ensured that the emotional weight of the AIDS crisis was translated into terms understood by the broadest possible audience, the violation of fundamental American rights. The film's quiet triumph lies in its success in moving the national conversation from fear and silence toward acknowledgement and empathy, paving the way for subsequent, perhaps even more challenging, cinematic explorations of marginalized American lives. The film's lasting cultural significance is deeply tied to its exploration of visibility and erasure, particularly how power structures attempt to dictate who is allowed to be seen as a professional and who is relegated to the shadows of public discourse. Andrew Beckett, by filing the suit, forces his erasure to become a matter of public record and legal scrutiny. This act of visibility is inherently dangerous in the context of late 1980s professional environments, where association with AIDS carried professional death sentences far more certain than the virus itself. The law firm's initial response, a swift, quiet severance, was an attempt to maintain corporate invisibility regarding the issue. Beckett's lawsuit shattered that veneer. Hanks's portrayal gains immense power from his nuanced communication of internal anguish through minimal external expression. He mastered the performance of someone physically depleted, yet intellectually dominant. Consider the scene where he is preparing his notes while visibly ill, the meticulous handwriting, the focused breathing, the way he uses physical props, a book, a pen, to anchor himself against dizziness. These are small acts of assertion, confirming to himself and the viewer that the virus has not yet claimed his core self, his competence. His vulnerability is not weakness. It is the visible price of maintaining dignity in the face of systemic hostility. Washington's development as Joe Miller is fascinating because it tracks a common societal journey, from abstract prejudice to concrete empathy. Miller's initial resistance to taking the case is rooted in a worldview that compartmentalizes disease, morality, and professional conduct. His breakthrough is not achieved through a sudden philosophical epiphany, but through the accumulation of undeniable evidence, the sheer volume of legal documentation Andrew prepared, the manifest injustice witnessed during deposition, and the observed degradation caused by the defense's tactics. Miller begins to apply the very principles of justice he champions in personal injury cases, the protection of the underdog against overwhelming corporate power, to a demographic he previously held at arm's length. This makes his final, passionate defense of Andrew feel earned, reflecting a genuine internal reshaping of his moral landscape. The portrayal of the legal opposition is vital in heightening the stakes. The defense attorneys are depicted not as mustache-twirling villains, but as highly competent, cold professionals executing a strategy designed to win by inflicting maximum psychological damage. Their relentless focus on Beckett's sexuality and his personal life serves as a chilling demonstration of how fear is weaponized in conservative institutions. By contrasting the cold efficiency of the defense with the growing, if reluctant, ethical fire of Miller and Conine, Demme successfully maps out the battle lines of American social progress: institutional inertia versus principled, humanistic advocacy. Philadelphia leaves a legacy precisely because it managed the delicate balancing act of engaging with a devastating epidemic while remaining commercially viable. It utilized the structure of a traditional Hollywood narrative, the underdog fighting the powerful corporation, to deliver a message that was, at the time, fiercely countercultural. The film ensured that the conversation about AIDS could not remain confined to activist circles. It entered the living rooms of Middle America, framed not as a fringe issue but as a crucial test of American civil rights. Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Territory of Cinema channel. If you enjoy what we do here, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Today we are going to be discussing the 1993 film Philadelphia. The narrative centers on a young, ambitious lawyer, Andrew Beckett, whose ascent within a prestigious Philadelphia law firm is swift and promising. He possesses a sharp intellect, honed by his time at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and a drive to succeed in the cutthroat world of corporate litigation. Andrew meticulously crafts an image of professional perfection, recognizing that in that environment, any perceived weakness could be career-ending. Unbeknownst to his colleagues, Andrew is living with AIDS. This dual existence becomes increasingly difficult to sustain as the physical manifestations of the illness begin to interfere with his demanding work schedule. The film carefully traces the quiet erosion of his professional facade. It's clear that Andrew draws strength from his background, perhaps fueled by the desire to prove himself in a field that often rewards conformity. The inevitable occurs when a crucial presentation is hampered by Andrew's deteriorating condition, a fact noticed by the senior partners. Shortly thereafter, he is dismissed. The official reason given is a supposed lapse in professional judgment concerning a case file, but the underlying truth, a reality the firm desperately wishes to ignore, is his medical status. Devastated and facing a bleak future, Andrew seeks legal recourse. This decision leads him to seek counsel from Joseph Miller, a prominent, often bombastic personal injury lawyer known for his aggressive courtroom style and his somewhat hesitant, prejudiced initial reaction to Andrew's situation. Miller himself is portrayed as a man comfortable in his established world, one where confronting deep-seated social anxieties, like those surrounding AIDS, is avoided unless absolutely necessary for a fee. The process of building the case exposes both men to the raw prejudice rampant in the early 90s. Andrew, usually so reserved and controlled, is forced into the public spotlight, while Miller has to confront his own ingrained discomfort. We see flashbacks to Andrew's life, his artistic inclinations, perhaps suggesting a sensitivity at odds with his corporate persona, and his relationship with his partner, Miguel, who provides a necessary source of unconditional support. As the trial progresses, the opposing counsel employs tactics designed not to argue the law, but to smear Andrew's character, focusing relentlessly on his sexuality and his illness. This tactic highlights the societal fear that permeated discussions of HIV/AIDS at the time, turning a wrongful termination suit into a referendum on morality. Miller, initially perhaps motivated by the potential payout, begins to genuinely champion Andrew's cause, witnessing firsthand the cruelty inflicted upon his client. His transformation is gradual, evolving from reluctant advocate to fiercely protective defender. The film details the physical toll the disease takes on Andrew, showing his vulnerability juxtaposed against the relentless aggression of the defense. Through these trials, both inside and outside the courtroom, a profound, unexpected bond forms between the two lawyers, one built on mutual respect born from shared adversity. The climax isn't simply a legal victory. It's a moment where the abstract concept of discrimination is given a profoundly human face, forcing the audience and the characters to acknowledge the inherent dignity denied to Andrew simply because of who he loved and what afflicted him. Though the victory is hard-won and tragically timed, it serves as a powerful testament to the necessity of fighting for one's inherent rights, even when facing overwhelming societal hostility. Andrew Beckett carried the weight of his brilliance heavily, a young man whose trajectory within that imposing Philadelphia firm seemed almost predetermined for partnership. One could sense the intense focus he brought to every brief, the kind of obsessive preparation often found in those who feel they must overcompensate, perhaps driven by a deeply personal desire to excel far beyond what was expected of someone like him, someone perhaps already marginalized in some unseen way. His early victories were quiet triumphs, achieved through meticulous dissection of legal precedent, a stark contrast to the flamboyant, results-oriented style of the personal injury lawyers he would eventually encounter. Joseph Miller, on the other hand, was a force of nature in the courtroom, a man whose energy seemed to fill every space he occupied. He was the quintessential Philadelphia trial lawyer, smelling of cheap coffee and victory, comfortable wading into the messy, emotional terrain of accidents and injuries, areas where the lines of right and wrong were often starkly drawn. Yet when Andrew first walked into his office, the air crackled with an unfamiliar tension. Miller's initial discomfort regarding Andrew's diagnosis wasn't just professional. It betrayed a deep-seated societal awkwardness, the kind that freezes people when confronted by what they don't understand or fear. The flashbacks woven into the narrative, showing Andrew's life outside the office, perhaps lingering over a canvas or sharing an intimate moment with Miguel, offered glimpses of the authentic self that the corporate world demanded he suppress. Miguel, steadfast and unwavering, became the anchor, the living proof that a full, loving life existed beyond the confines of legal briefs and malpractice insurance. Seeing Andrew's physical decline during the discovery phase was agonizing. The sharp tailoring of his suits suddenly seemed too heavy for his increasingly frail frame. The disease was stripping away the artifice, revealing the vulnerability beneath the polished exterior. During the depositions, the defense lawyers were ruthless, transforming the legal argument into a moral inquisition. They weren't just questioning Andrew's competence, they were attacking the very fabric of his private life, trying to make his illness synonymous with unreliability. It was an ugly spectacle, showcasing how easy it is to dehumanize someone when you can reduce their existence to a diagnosis. Miller, witnessing this calculated cruelty, began his metamorphosis. Initially viewing the case as a high-stakes legal puzzle, he started absorbing Andrew's plight, his aggressive instincts turning outward against the predatory tactics of the opposing side. The courtroom ceased being merely a venue for financial gain. It became a stage for fundamental justice. Miller's transformation was palpable, his closing arguments shifting from calculated rhetoric to impassioned defense of human dignity, a testament to the corrosive power of prejudice when finally confronted head-on by committed advocacy. The shared journey forged a bond that transcended their vastly different professional origins, rooted in the shared necessity of fighting an unjust world. The emotional landscape of the trial was relentless, a constant battering ram against Andrew's fragile composure. We see him striving to maintain the rigorous standards of his former profession, even while enduring agonizing physical symptoms that no amount of legal preparation could mask. His mind, still razor-sharp, would sometimes betray him in small public ways. A slight hesitation in answering a question, a tremor in his hand while turning a page, and each instance was seized upon by the opposing counsel as definitive proof of his supposed instability. It was a performance of suffering, played out under the harsh, unforgiving lights of the courtroom. Joseph Miller, channeling his courtroom prowess, found an unexpected target for his formidable aggression. His initial skepticism melted away, replaced by a protective fury typically reserved for the most vulnerable of his personal injury clients. He began to study Andrew not just as a plaintiff, but as a brilliant mind deliberately crushed by fear-mongering. Miller started to internalize the injustice, perhaps recognizing a parallel between the powerful firms who discarded people based on their perceived weakness and the insurance companies he routinely battled. His characteristic courtroom swagger adopted a new, sharper edge, aimed squarely at dismantling the hypocrisy embedded in the defense's arguments. The contrast between Andrew's disciplined, highly ordered professional past and the chaotic, messy reality of his illness and the ensuing legal battle was heartbreakingly clear. Andrew's dedication to his career had been an almost ascetic pursuit, sacrificing personal life for professional elevation. Now, that very elevation had become the weapon used against him. The film beautifully illustrates how the things Andrew tried hardest to hide, his private life, his body's betrayal, were the very things that demanded to be seen for the case to succeed. The victory, when it finally arrived, was bittersweet, heavy with the knowledge of what had been lost in the struggle. It was less a celebration of legal victory and more a profound, weary acknowledgement that the system had been forced, grudgingly, to recognize the humanity of a man it had tried so hard to erase. For Miller, the win wasn't just a high-profile case closed. It marked a significant internal realignment, a professional turning point where the pursuit of justice momentarily eclipsed the pursuit of pure profit. For Andrew, the end of the legal ordeal coincided tragically with the final stages of his illness, leaving the audience with the lingering, poignant image of a battle won too late for the warrior himself, a testament etched in memory rather than etched on a partnership plaque. The final phase of the battle saw Andrew retreating further into the protective cocoon offered by his partner, Miguel, and the strained but growing support of Miller. The exhaustion etched onto Andrew's face was no longer just stress from litigation. It was the physical manifestation of a life lived under duress, hiding a truth in an environment utterly hostile to it. He was confronting not just a law firm, but an entire era's fear of the unknown, crystallized into legal maneuverings. One could observe in his demeanor the profound sadness of realizing that the meritocracy he believed in was utterly conditional on conformity, on invisibility regarding difference. Miller's advocacy reached its peak as he transformed his summation into a fierce moral appeal. He used his considerable skill at painting vivid pictures for the jury, not of legal precedents, but of the daily reality Andrew faced. The humiliation of being watched, the fear of being discovered, the simple, crushing weight of discrimination. Miller, the veteran of messy, tangible grievances, found himself arguing for the intangible right to exist without persecution.